Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. I hope you're having a good morning. Pull up a chair, have some coffee, and let's get started. I went back to this older survey that we posted from Revolt against Plutocracy on Facebook. It had 2.4 thousand votes. It reached 28,631 people. And the question we asked on this survey is, if Bernie Sanders does not win the nomination, what will you do? If not, vote blue. Please leave comments as to what you will do instead. And so if you see 36% said vote blue, 64% said not vote blue. And the sample size, 2.4 thousand. And then distributed, not a random sample by any means, distributed around the interwebs. The Bernie or Buzz people definitely are not 64% of all Bernie voters, because I can show you the statistics on exit polling. So I'm not trying to say that 64% of Bernie supporters are Bernie or bust, but I will say, as I did here, if just half of all Burners became busters, not even that many, the Dem Party loyalists would have no choice but to nominate Sanders. Based on the math I've done, about 25% were busters, then, and we are about 25%, then Trump is a foregone conclusion. But this assertion, if half became busters, what would happen then, instead of just giving you Trump again, we would prove undeniably that we're going to give you Trump again soon enough for you to wake up, assuming you are a traditional Democrat. If you're not, then apologies. But if you are a traditional Democrat and you see half of the Sanders supporters won't vote for anyone else in the general election, you might wake up and say, oh, I guess we just have to nominate Bernie then in the primaries, in the caucuses. And that's the whole point of Bernie or bust. Some people have called it Bernie or bluff. But what they don't realize is what I showed you in other shows, is that there are so many categories of voters that just can't be talked into voting for anyone else. A lot of them are trying to decide between Bernie or Trump. And they're not Democrats, they're populists, they're independent voters. And so telling them to just fall in line behind whoever the DNC chooses is not reasonable. So even if the Bernie or Buzz people came to their senses, you still can't control all of the other categories of voters who won't come to their senses. Steve Jepson, Bernie or bust needs to focus their energy on taking over the two chambers of Congress, as well as state and local elections. That's where the real change will come from, just saying. I said, help us do it. He said, I am voting. I don't support Bernie or bust. That's part of the reason we ended up with Trump. And I knew that as soon as I saw the comment about, oh, we need to, especially when you see down ballot, we need to work down ballot. We need to take over the Congress. Take them over with what? Take them over with corporate, neoliberal, sock puppet politicians? We've got more than enough of those. We do need to take them over, but with true progressives. And there aren't a lot of those as of yet. And so when you see somebody say, we need to canvass, we need to work hard to get the vote out, they're right, we do need to, but what they really want is to sheepdog the Bernie supporters into the Democrat fold without giving them any real change. This is thinly veiled elitism, because what it really means is that we don't want to give you progressives real change, like Medicare for all. We don't want to give you higher wages. We just want to keep things the way they have been in the good old days, because then we'll keep our status quo and we won't have to share our toys with anybody. Now, Steve, if you're watching this, That's what I think. I think you're hiding your elitism. So I told Steve, you need to educate yourself. If you don't like Trump, then you need to stop insisting on neoliberals and progressives, because if you don't figure it out, Trump is a foregone conclusion, guaranteed. He just waves it away. This is a very typical Democrat reaction. I'll just agree to disagree. I don't think you've got it. I think you're bluffing. And then I said, then you are allowing this. It's a Kathy Copeland Padden article, Attack of the Progressives. What do you call a neoliberal who's too stupid or cowardly to admit they're a neoliberal? A progressive. She's talking about these progressives. Despite how it may seem to the casual observer, the biggest impediment to the progressive movement's success and the planet's survival isn't the GOP or even neoliberal Dems. Nope, it's the cockroach-like infestation of progressives insisting that they and their candidates are genuine, bona fide, honest-to-God progressives. These are the folks who tell you Joe Biden isn't a disgusting predator or trill. I love Bernie, but Warren, the biggest progressive ever, has a plan for that. Sure she does. Bernie's plans in one hand and her fingers crossed behind her back with the other. It's amazing how people can't see this. Lizzie is that kid who duly notes a peer's great idea for an essay or Halloween costume and claims it as their own, smiling all the while. You know, that kid every other kid hates, but most adults love. Progressives like Warren and her minions, mostly disgruntled Hillbots, are the Eddie Haskells of the current political arena. Eddie, if you don't know, I'm old enough to know, he was a brown-nosing, troublemaking kid who talks out of both sides of his mouth on Leave It to Beaver. I remember Mrs. Cleaver would always think Eddie was the shit. But the viewers knew better. She says, yeah, I'm old, shut up. Anyway, there are two different strains of progressivism infecting American politics, the deliberate and the derpy. Here are the deliberates. I swear all my platforms are my own. I took none of them from Bernie Sanders. These are the establishment Democratic Party leaders and the wealthy neoliberal constituents who benefit from their elitist policies. Exactly. They don't want to move forward because they fear it might personally hurt them in some way. Hurt is defined here as having to pay your fair share and allow others the advantages you just take for granted. I'm not going to go into it now, but I stumbled on the old movie Skull and Bones, and I was reminded that John Kerry and George W. Bush were Skull and Bones members who ran against each other for president. And one of the commentators who interviewed John Kerry asked him about his orientation into Skull and Bones, and he said, something like, "You're going to get me killed." What did he say? Society is known as bones. I think the interview is at the very end. He said, "You trying to get rid of me here?" That's what John Kerry said in the 2004 presidential campaign. So what we've got is a skull and bones situation, and these Democratic Party leaders, often in Hollywood, it's amazing how many of these thought leaders and talent agents and CIA operatives have a real ongoing presence in the Hollywood, in the Los Angeles area. So their every word and action is deliberately calculated to derail the real progressive movement. So we've got a front, we've got a faux progressive movement that's a front for the DNC. Why? Money, of course. Let's take a look at Medicare for All. The American people overwhelmingly support it, yet only Bernie Sanders is making it a cornerstone of his presidential campaign. The reason is simple. Every other candidate is far too beholden to the health care insurance scammers, They have no spare fucks for their ever-growing pool of constituents dying stupid, needless deaths thanks to corporate greed. Their greed. Progressive greed. Deliberate progressives pay lip service. I got to read this caption under the picture. "Bernie, I found the knife I stuck in your back in 2016. No, wait, that's Obama's. Deliberate progressives pay lip service regarding the desperate need for single-payer health care, but lip service only. They surface pander just enough to win votes with no intention of actually setting their plan in motion. Bottom line, if the rabble didn't need to accept shitty jobs just for shitty insurance, they'd attain a level of autonomy entirely unacceptable to their corporate overlords. Poor and sick people fearful for their future are much more malleable than well-paid, healthy people. You know, people who don't have to shake out the couch cushions for gas money to get to that shitty job. The deliberate progressive battle cry is, I got mine, screw you! But they try to pretty it up with platitudes and empty rhetoric about unity and beating Trump. So when you see somebody yelling about unity, your job is to show them this article by Kathy Copeland Padden. Now we've got Bernie Sanders' crystal ball. Unity is centrist myth that is undermining Sanders' campaign. They start out with this Politico hack smear job, up and close with a candidate in decline and seemingly stuck in his ways. You can thank Holly Otterbein for that. We've been flaming her on Twitter. Feel free to join us. This was September 30th. This Politico article came out.
Showing $25 million raised from 1.4 million donations, with the top employers being Starbucks, Walmart, and Amazon. But I guess if people keep writing it, eventually maybe it will be true. Now let's be clear about a couple of things here. Sanders has a large movement behind him. He leads among key demographic groups, and he's well positioned in early states. Furthermore, he's not going to drop out, guys, in spite of the absurd speculation and insistence of many a clueless pundit and journalist. But it is fair to say that if Sanders really wants to win, he does have to shift the current dynamic. So how exactly could he do that? First, let me say that I believe the landscape is fundamentally ripe for Sanders' anti-establishment, revolutionary message. There's a lot that's wrong with the comparison of Trump to Sanders, but one part of that analysis is fundamentally correct. They do both attempt to speak to the existential rot at the core of modern America: the late-stage capitalism, obsessive consumerism, dislocation, and fundamental loss of hope that's led to spikes in suicide, addiction, and deaths of despair. Keep in mind, 70% of Americans say that they are angry at the political establishment. Majorities of Americans believe our top leaders are corrupt and face no accountability for it.
70% of Americans believe that that things need to change. And so who are the two change people? Right now, the people that Trump presents himself as a change person, and Bernie actually would be a change person.
There are legions of voters out there waiting to back a leader who they believe is truly different. Okay, so why then is Sanders stuck? Now, I believe there's a pretty simple answer here, actually. Sanders' key differentiator, that he is an existential threat to the establishment, has really never been clearly or sharply articulated by the campaign. Without that key ingredient, he's just another progressive candidate offering big plans.
One other thing that she's said in other shows, it isn't just the campaign not ready to pull the gloves off and start taking swipes at Elizabeth Warren. The other thing is the media blockade. And Krystal's show, it has 63,000 views on this one, and 100. They just now went over, like in the last couple of days, they went over 100,000 subscribers. But that's still not the reach of CNN or MSDNC. And so you've got that's where we come in. She says, how can we change the dynamics? How can the campaign change the dynamics? In a way, the campaign is hamstrung because they have to make these promises to work within the Democratic Party. But Bernie or busters don't have to make those promises. If you want to change the dynamic, then you need to hold the mainline traditional Democrats' feet to the flames. I don't think she would even endorse Bernie or bust. And that's the obvious answer to her question.
And yet the emphasis on that key differentiator seems to have been neutered by self-serving calls for unity from the more establishment-friendly candidates. That so-called unity is, of course, only ever enforced in one direction. Now, don't get me wrong here. Unity is a fine enough thing. Once there is a Democratic nominee, of course it will be best for left-of-center people to unify behind that candidate.
No. That's this part of derpy. No, Krystal, no, that's not going to work. We're not going to unify. And that's where she needs to watch this episode of the Bernie or Bust show. Unity, my ass. Vote blue, my ass. We won't be held hostage. Really, if Krystal, you ever watch my show instead of the other way around, I go through all the categories of voters who just won't vote for a neoliberal. And so your unity, you're really preaching against yourself there if you say that you would come around and vote for the DNC anointed candidate if they deny Bernie again. You're just giving them permission to screw all of us.
In hopes of beating the completely odious Trump. But that is then. In the current context of the Democratic primary, unity is primarily weaponized by centrists to hide from voters the fact that their policies are actually way lamer and less exciting than their more progressive opponents. So, think of Amy Klobuchar, repeatedly telling debate audiences that what unites the candidates is much greater than what divides them, or Pete Buttigieg cutting off some discussion of differences to play schoolmarm and tell everyone to cut it out. Everyone's afraid that a sharp debate will get Trump reelected, but let's be clear here. Nothing would be better for Trump than some lame-ass winning because no one bothered to challenge them for the sake of unity. It's not only centrists, though, who have made use of the unity trick. Warren supporters have also employed it to great effect. Unity is used to shield any differences from coming to light between Warren and Sanders that may be favorable to Sanders. We're repeatedly told that their policies are just the same, with the always ready caveat, of course, that Warren's are much more detailed. They're both outsider progressive warriors, but Warren's just nicer about it. That's how you can end up with the analysis offered by one MSNBC pundit who, full disclosure, happens to be a friend of mine, that the only...
Happens to be a friend of mine. I wrote an article on this friend of yours. I wrote an article about Mimi Roca, and then I updated it to talk about Emily Tish Sussman. She has gone viral in the worst way because she endorsed the idea that anyone who still supports Bernie Sanders over Elizabeth Warren is showing your sexism. She says Bernie Sanders has peaked and added, or she agreed with Craig Melvin, it feels like Warren is pulling together a coalition of people, particularly women and also people of color, who liked Hillary Clinton but said Warren is also pulling a lot from Sanders, and Sanders is still in the race. What we're seeing of his support is that there's a ceiling. There's nowhere to go, but there is no up to go, Sussman said of Sanders, then added, I actually overheard someone saying, now here's some real good journalism for you. I overheard someone saying that I thought was an interesting point, that basically at this point, if you're still supporting Sanders as opposed to Warren, it's kind of showing your sexism because she has more detailed plans and her plans have evolved. I thought it was an interesting point, and I think there may be something to it. Her plans have evolved. It just means that she keeps pivoting for the sake of polls. Who did we have that was talking about that? This idea of I think there's Jimmy Dore. That's who I'm looking for here. Jimmy Dore has some wonderful footage on this one.
Plans and her plans have evolved. I thought it was an interesting point, and I think there may be something to it.
Yeah.
I actually overheard someone.
Let's check it out. Here we go.
There's a ceiling. There is nowhere to go, but there is no up to go. And all of those support, I actually overheard someone saying that I thought was an interesting point, that basically at this point, if you are still supporting Sanders as opposed to Warren, it's kind of showing your sexism because she has more detailed plans and her plans have evolved. I thought it was an interesting point, and I think there may be something to it.
Yeah. Look at that look on her face. So Krystal, this is your friend?
The only reason to support Sanders over Warren is sexism. Now, if you take the media portrayal at face value, then why would you pick the older, crabbier version of the same progressive vision?
We should also note that Emily is a child, an heiress of oil money, and both of her parents are wealthy, and she's somebody who's wanting to play the Monopoly game. And after she owns everything, then she wants to keep everyone else out. That's her agenda. That's why Emily was taking that tack, and we're all onto them. That's especially Kathy Copeland Patton.
And approach. Here are the distinctions that the rules of unity apparently allow you to make. Warren's the happy warrior, and Sanders is a crabby old man. Warren is pragmatic, and he's ridiculous. Warren is winning, and he's losing. Basically comparisons that are either flattering to Warren, which center mostly on optics, or pure fantasy are fair game, while actual policy discussion or theory of change differences are considered out of bounds. It's pretty bizarre. If Team Sanders wants to win, they need to stop playing along with the bogus unity rules that have been imposed by people who want to see them lose. Take the gloves off. Embrace angry and combative. The choice between Sanders and Warren and Biden needs to be made explicit. Only one is an existential threat to the established way of doing things. Only one has consistently put Team Working Class ahead of Team Democratic Party. Lay it out. Otherwise, he's just the grumpy guy whose policies paved the way for Elizabeth Warren. Sanders talks, of course, about a political revolution and the power of the grassroots, but this vague revolutionary language can be and has been co-opted by other candidates. Warren now regularly incorporates language about her grassroots movement that sounds very Sanders-esque. No. To really convince people he is the only candidate in the screw both of these corrupt parties lane, he's got to be more aggressive and, frankly, more personal. Sanders should, in fact, take a cue from Trump's primary performance. These people deserve to be shamed and embarrassed for the destruction they've wrought in our country. It's already clear to the media and the Democratic establishment that Sanders alone occupies that screw both of these corrupt parties lane. The Democratic Party hates Bernie Sanders, and he should welcome their hatred.
I'm going to stop. Her conclusion is that Bernie is needing to take the gloves off, and she may be right. But what I would conclude is that we need to help. Bernie has always said that he can't do this by himself. We need to take the gloves off. We need to tell the establishment Democrats that there's no way in hell we're going to line up behind them if they choose Elizabeth Warren, and they seem all set to do that. They've given up on Biden, and they've swung around. All the signs were there months ago when I wrote an article predicting that just this thing would happen. And it will become more and more obvious that they don't care about Biden. They're just going to swing behind Elizabeth, but they have to do it carefully, because if the establishment, Neera Tanden, for example, or David Brock, or John Cowan, all of the Third Way and Center for American Progress, all the think tanks, if they all swing clearly behind Elizabeth, that'll spook the Bernie supporters, because they know that they know Third Way is centrist. They know that centrist means neoliberal and not progressive, just like Kathy said. So they're going to do it stealthily, but they're absolutely going to put money behind it. Even though it's funny to watch some of the articles where the big money, the Wall Street people would say, "Oh, no, it can't be Elizabeth Warren," wink, wink, and then you realize she's the one. She's anointed. If I can find it, I'll put an article under there under this video that shows that they have all the points, all the evidence that the elitist pundits and thought leaders have shifted their support behind Elizabeth, and that alone should just tell us, nope, sorry, we're not going to be sheepdogged again. All right, so the Skull and Bones people right now seem to be winning. If you watch the polls, if you read the Real Clear Politics polls, it looks like the Bernie Sanders, Bernie or bust contingent is going to have to get the word out that we're not going to support Elizabeth Warren. It's already coming to that, but a lot of people haven't seen it yet. So your job, dear reader, dear viewer, is to wake up the people you know around you. Buy a bumper sticker, bernieorbust.info. You can go to that website and get one. Make a lawn sign. I've shown you how to do that in previous episodes. Leave me a comment if you want help. making your own BernieOrBust.info lawn sign and join the army. And we'll do that for Bernie. That's what we have to do anyway. If Bernie is elected president, we'll have to work right with him. We'll have to stand with him and fight with him. Let's start the fight now. Bernie or bust is the answer to the quandary that Krystal Ball is presenting here. So that's all I got for you today. Hope to see you tomorrow. Keep on burning.